Today, we're going to be looking at 11.5 imperialism in Southeast Asia. We've already talked about imperialism in Africa as well as India, and now we're looking at Asia. And we're going to be looking at how the demand for these Asian products drove Western imperialists to ultimately seek possession of these territories. And then we're going to be examining the consequences of Western imperialism. To begin, we're going to be examining this territory right here. A little bit blurry, but this is known as the Pacific Rim. And essentially, these are colonies that border the Pacific Ocean. And these are really important because they provide a strategic route to China. These colonies also have a tropical agriculture, they provide minerals, oil, and they also have new crops that are introduced. And with these new crops, we see that there's new markets um, for new products. So by the 18th century, the Dutch East India Company, which is not to be confused with the British East India Company, controlled 3,000 miles um, of Indonesian islands. So if we look over here, so the Dutch had controlled this territory, and the British set up a trade post in Singapore. And then we see that the French ended up controlling Indochina, which is this territory here. And the Germans also made a stake at the Marshall Islands, New Guinea, as well as the Solomon Islands. France controlled Cambodia, Laos, as well as northern Vietnam, which was known as the French Indochina. And we see that this is a direct colonial control, meaning that the French government controlled all of the government positions in their colonies. So by 1895, if we look at this map, we can see that Southeast Asia is really carved up. We see Britain, the Dutch, French, as well as Spanish and Portuguese. And the only independent territory is right here. But ultimately, we're going to look at the importance of China. So, with imperialism, of course, there are these impacts, some of them being that the economies were based on cash crops, some of the cash crops being like sugarcane, coffee, rubber, bananas, pineapples. And so these new products are now being introduced to Europe. With the Western imperialism, we do see some positive things, such as roads, which we've discussed in other countries, harbors, railroad systems, which help improve communication and transportation. And all of this is ultimately benefiting the European businesses. We also see, again, just like we noticed in India, is that there's an increase in education, sanitation, and health. However, in 12.1, we're going to see that China really does try to resist as much as they can outside influence. So China really resisted outside influence because they were extremely self-sufficient. They had a stable agricultural-based economy, which was supported based off of rice. Previously, they had trade with Spain and Portugal, excuse me, and they were introduced to new crops, some of them being like sweet potatoes. And so all of these new crops, as well as their sufficiency in agriculture, was able to feed their large population without having to rely on outside trade. However, we start to see that eventually um, China is influenced by Western trade. We're going to be looking at the tea opium connection. So in Guangzhou, um, which is a southern port in China, it was the only port that was open to foreign trade. And this actually benefited China because they earned more money from their exports than the money that they were spending on imports because they were so self sufficient. But European merchants were really trying to crack into China, and so they were determined to find a product that would force China to trade with them. Because remember, China was self-sufficient, and they didn't want to have any sort of influence with outside Western culture. And so the only product that they could really get was opium. Now, opium, it's actually grown in India, and it's a narcotic that is from the poppy plant, and it was originally used for medical purposes, but by the 1700s, the British began smuggling opium for non-medical reasons into China, and as a result, more than 12 million Chinese become addicted. And so this is the trade route that we're looking. If we know that opium is from India and Britain controls India, we can see that this port right here, all these ports along, we have opium that is going, um, making its way into the Pacific. And in exchange, we also have tea, but it's this quick route. Ultimately, war breaks out because China's emperor is so upset by the addiction and the influence of Western society. So in 1839, the Opium War breaks out, and it's caused by the opium trade. China ultimately loses the war because Britain has an extremely modern navy. We've seen this previously with other aspects of history that Britain has a strong navy. And after the Opium War, it ends in the Treaty of Nanjing in 1842. And this treaty gives Britain control of Hong Kong. So if we pause for a second, Guangzhou is right here. It was that initial port that was open for foreign trade. And now Britain has control of Hong Kong. And in 1844, other nations win extraterritorial rights. And this is an important term because it means that foreigners are exempt from all of these laws at Guangzhou as well as other ports. So foreigners don't need to be held accountable for breaking any sort of laws. And we're going to stop here and then we'll pick up on the continued effects of the war.